Leslie Petrick, who are here from the Greenwich Conservation Department and Commission. Cynthia Ellinger, who is the Connecticut Ornithological Association Vice President and also a longtime teacher naturalist at Greenwich Audubon and has been a humongous help this spring in particular. And I want to let you know the speakers will go in the following order. We'll have Leo Smith, who is the former executive director of International Dark Sky Association, speaking on light pollution and making recommendations for reducing light as well as regulation recommendations. Next, we'll have Dr. Mario Motta, a retired cardiologist who wrote the policy adopted by the American Medical Association to recognize light pollution as a health hazard. His talk will focus on how light pollution affects human and environmental health. And then he'll be joining us on Zoom. I think he's already there. And finally, Meredith Barges, who you met just a second ago, who helped us hear the migratory songs, is the co-chair of Lights Out Connecticut and a policy researcher for the Yale Bird-Friendly Building Initiative. Meredith's talk will focus on the impact of light pollution on migrating birds, as well as touching on social equity and light pollution. And I think now we are going to start a short video. We're going to take questions at the conclusion of every presenter's talk. If you are on Zoom, I'll check the Q&A and I'll read your question aloud. If you're in the room, if you raise your hand, I'll call on you. And so is the video ready? Yeah.
We live on the surface of a planet, spinning on its axis once every 24 hours. Its rhythms of day and night are embedded in the biological makeup of all life. During the day, we bathe in the glow of the sun. As night approaches, darkness takes over. It's a time to rest, to rejuvenate, to marvel at the beauty of the night. Until just over a century ago, our night skies were very dark. Now, even the wilderness is invaded by light. Our cities glow at night. Buildings are lit up. Unshielded lights blind us as we travel along our streets and roads. All these artificial lights overpower the darkness. The waste of energy is obvious, even from space. Much of that yellow glare the astronauts see comes from streetlights. They produce most of the light pollution on the planet. The glare is scattered by the atmosphere, creating sky glows over the landscape. We are losing the dark of night at the speed of light. Light pollution threatens the health of every living thing on Earth. Lights at night disrupt plant growth. Unshielded lights contribute to the deaths of countless land and sea animals each year. Migrating birds crash into illuminated buildings. Newly hatched sea turtles mistake the glow of electric lights for the shimmer of the ocean's surface. Bright lights at night also directly affect humans. Drivers and pedestrians temporarily blinded by poorly designed lights have suffered tragic accidents. Light pollution poses a silent threat to our health. Exposure to light at night disrupts the circadian rhythms that regulate our sleep cycles. People working at night under bright lights or living in light-polluted cities face a higher risk of developing diseases such as breast and prostate cancer. Here is a night sky with typical light pollution. On a good night, only the brighter stars and planets pierce the glow. This is what the night sky might look like if we could remove the light pollution. That faint band of light stretching across the sky is the Milky Way, our home galaxy. Because of light pollution, many people have never seen it. Astronomers know all too well the problems caused by lighting up the night. They need clear, dark skies to study the many fascinating objects in the universe. Light pollution simply washes out their view of the cosmos. Lighting up the night sky wastes money and fossil fuels. To keep a 100-watt light bulb turned on every night for a year takes the equivalent energy output from burning half a ton of coal. Multiplied by the billions of lights blazing up from Earth, the cost of energy we use to light up the night is colossal. While lighting is needed, there are some simple things we can do to ensure that it's neighborhood-friendly, energy-efficient, and helps preserve dark skies. We can replace light fixtures that send light up to the sky with ones that direct light down, exactly where we want it. They're called fully shielded fixtures. We can also illuminate only the places that need it. And of course, we can just turn off unnecessary lights. These are smart ways to use lighting. They offer simple solutions to problems caused by light pollution. We have a choice between wasting resources by sending light to the sky or learning to use light more responsibly. Light pollution is a problem each of us can help solve. Together, we can bring back the dark of night to planet Earth.
You are up.
So I just wanted to do a short demonstration. Actually, I'm going to bring them back here because I'll talk real loud. But basically, the concept of shielded lighting, here you can see not the light directly, but just the reflected light because all the light shines straight down. And the difference is when it goes like this, your eye says, hey, I don't like that. That's unshielded. The second part of this has to do with what's called correlated color temperature. This is 5,000 K or Kelvin, correlated color temperature, has a lot of blue light in it, and your eye doesn't like that even less than it liked the other one. When you have high levels of correlated color temperature, that includes high levels of blue wavelength light. And blue wavelength light will cause much more light pollution than if you have that more orange warm light. So one of the things that you can do when you go to the store, when you see a box, you'll see, it's a little too much to see here, but there's a bar here with an indicator that shows what the correlated color temperature is. And so if you look for correlated color temperatures of 2,700, 2,200, that's good. And forever we have lived with that. All of the incandescent lights that we've had, all are 2,200 Kelvin. It's only when the LEDs came into play that we ended up with a lot more than we thought in the way of that blue wavelength light that causes the increase in light pollution. And just a short explanation on why. Blue wavelength light has a much shorter wavelength, and that much shorter wavelength will cause that light to hit an air particulate and bounce back down as light pollution. So the more that you have in blue light, the more light pollution you will have. So when you consider lighting for residential or commercial or government, keeping that blue wavelength light in mind, buy those lights that are 2,700 Kelvin or less. Okay. Anybody have any questions about the Kelvin, about the blue wavelength light?
I remember you were talking about the like exponential difference between incandescent and LED lights. Would you like to detail that?
Well, it was just that the incandescent lights too also were in that 2,200 Kelvin family, and in the 1980s and 1990s and 2000s, before LEDs really hit the market, we were all living with 2,200 K as far as the correlated color temperature. No one was complaining, you know, it all worked. But now we have a situation where when LEDs first came out, they were 7,000 Kelvin, and they have basically used a phosphor coating on the light emitting diode to suppress most of that blue wavelength light. And so when you go to the store, like I was mentioning there, you'll see a little bar indicator that shows exactly what that light does in the way of emitting the 2,700, 3,000, 4,000, whatever it is. The ones that I showed you there, 2,700 was the warm, 5,000 was the white. Okay. Yep. So in this slide presentation, we'll go through some things that involve more than just the light pollution. Glare, for example, actually causes problems because you don't see as well when you have glare, and it can actually cause blindness and harsh shadows. Next slide. Light pollution, and it shows here how it can be clutter when you have a lot more light than you need. Using a dimmer on whatever lighting fixtures you have is a great thing, because then if the light puts out too much light, you can always sort of dim it down to the area that you think, is what you need. Some cities like Tucson, Arizona, actually are dimming down their streetlights, leaving them on what we'll call full until about 11 o'clock at night. And then a dimmer automatically cuts it down 50% from 11 o'clock at night till 5 in the morning. And then if you're dealing in, the winter months, you probably are in dark when it's 5 o'clock, so it brings it back to full. Next slide. So the movie went over this, but basically the sky glow will create that aura of orange that you see in the distance, and that basically washes out a lot of the stars. Next slide. We went over this just now about the light emitting diodes emitting a lot more blue content, and what we want is those that are rated 2700 or lower as being ideal. Next slide. And this basically just gives a demonstration of how with less light pollution you have 2000 to 2500 K, and that's in that orange family. And then the higher you get becomes more bluish. Next slide. And showing you just a technical demonstration of how they actually suppress the blue light on that little LED chip, which emits a lot of that blue light. They put a red phosphor layer, and then on top of that, they put a green-yellow phosphor layer, and by putting those two layers of phosphor, they end up with emitting almost no blue light. Next slide. So the solutions for that blue light problem is to create municipal regulations that limit the outdoor lighting in terms of the correlated color temperature. A lot of municipalities will put out their regulations that say that you have to shield the light. Well, that's halfway there. The other half is to say that you can't use lights that emit anything more than 2700 Kelvin. Next slide. This gives you a demonstration of what light pollution has been like in the late 50s, all the way to what's projected for 2025. Next slide. Flowers need pollination, and 1/3 of all human food requires a pollinator. Many plants and flowers are pollinated by nocturnal insects or small animals, moths or bats. Altering the light conditions at night can further unravel our web of life, which ultimately disrupts our food sources. Animals are used to going out at a particular time at night. You put light out there, all of a sudden their predators might be able to find them when previously they weren't. Next slide. So here's a demonstration on the glare part of it. The good light that's coming from that building is in the yellow, and all that wasted energy by having that light tilted up like that is represented in the orange. So you have 100% good light there, and a lot of times you can use a lot less light. You're not having to use 100 watt, maybe use 60 watt or 40 watt if that light is directed to where you need it. Next slide. Here's a good demonstration of glare in the top right corner. That black area, boy, that certainly looks like nothing's there because there's glare coming at the camera. Block that glare, and lo and behold, someone's there. So you actually see a lot better if you block the glare. Next slide. Solutions of glare require that you use fully shielded lights, and that's both in the Greenwich Municipal Code as well as in the state building code. The key is to request enforcement, and the problem is that the zoning enforcement officer in any municipality has 35 balls in the air, and they probably don't have time for more than 10. I mean, it's just crazy. And you're coming in talking to them about a problem that no one else is complaining about. So, it's difficult, but we're not going to get anywhere if we don't ask for enforcement. Next. And what about curfews? Do we really need the light on all night long, or could we turn it off? And we, in my situation, we have a street in back of us where the sidewalks roll up at 10 o'clock. In my own position, I don't think we need streetlights at all. But if we did need them, do we really need them on at 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the morning? No one's driving. So dealing with outdoor lighting in terms of using some type of device to turn the light out when you don't need it helps. Next slide. Connecticut State Building Code is wonderful because it has a light pollution control element in it. And that requirement applies only to commercial buildings, not residential. But what's wonderful about it is that it requires all lighting to be fully shielded. It makes exceptions for Christmas tree lights, for swimming pool lights, for a few other things. But when we're talking about shopping malls and parking lots, we're talking about required full shielded lighting. Next slide. So you can go to the next slide. And with street lighting in 2001, Connecticut became one of the few states that actually regulates street lights to be fully shielded. Later, the Public Utility Control Authority approved a new rate for street lights that turn off at midnight. So that gives an incentive. It's not a lot of money. It's not night and day in terms of money savings, but it is something. Next. There are, in my opinion, I've been on the roadway lighting committee that sets the standards nationally for roadway lighting for 13 years. And I will tell you that, in my opinion, roadway lighting is more often than not a waste. Now, whether we're talking about interstate highways or we're talking about side streets, it doesn't matter. One of the problems that we have in terms of the way that the standards are set is that we've got probably 60–70% of the voting members on the committee come from companies that make streetlights. So they're very interested in promoting them. But the ways that we can work with this, one way is to adopt a streetlight warranting policy at the municipal level. What does that say? It basically says, okay, let's form a committee. Let's decide when and where a streetlight is needed. Yes, we need it at a crosswalk. Yes, we need it at a school. Yes, we need it at the fire department. Yes, we need it at the railroad crossing. On and on and on. 15, 20 reasons why a streetlight is warranted. And then what you do is form an audit committee, and they go out and they check every streetlight. Does it fit one of the boxes that we said were warranted? If it does, that's great. But what if it doesn't? Then it's time to take a look at the possibility of actually removing that light from service because it's not providing any good. An example I use with the interstate highways is Massachusetts from 95 all the way out. You don't have any streetlights. They use reflectors that are embedded in the road, but no streetlights. And the Merritt Parkway, we don't use any streetlights on the Merritt Parkway. Why do we need streetlights all these other places? And a lot of times, the people that make those decisions are just, they want to cover their liability. They don't want any problem. So but if they put it in, no one can scold them, you know, so. But we are wasting a ton of money on street lighting. Next. So how can residential uses protect the night sky? It was use shielded fixtures, use timers to avoiding the fact that you leave the light on all night long when you really don't need to. And sometimes if you have some fear of what's going on out there, use a motion sensor. Motion sensors will sometimes come on for no reason or other than the fact that a cat or a fox or something like that ran out in the area. But motion sensors are a great way to keep the light off. And avoid overlighting. Do you really need to have a 150-watt spotlight as opposed to a 40-watt bulb? Next. So residential, use the good neighbor lighting. Next. Here's some examples. All of the good neighbor lighting involves light fixtures where the light itself is inside the metal crown. You don't actually see the bulb or you don't see the light. All you see is the reflection of the light coming off the street or the grass or whatever. Next. Here's more examples of fully shielded lights. Next. So finally, if you have any questions, you can take down my contact information and give me a call. If you're interested in joining Dark Sky, there's a website there you can go to. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Does anyone have any questions in the room?
Has Greenwich changed their streetlights, like maybe within the past 5 years or so? They seem brighter than they used to be, like down on Sound Beach Avenue, down the street here. I don't know if they've changed them to maybe halogen or some other kind of bulb. They seem to be, some are so intense as you go down the street.
Most likely, and without having seen it, I can't say for sure, but most likely, it's switching from the old high-pressure sodium light to an LED. The LED is going to produce a lot more blue light. It's going to look a lot more intense. But if it's whiter, it's probably LED.
It seems brighter too, like it casts like to the driveway. It's like near my mailbox, if I take my mail out, I can read it. The light is so bright. If it's, 10 o'clock at night. It's quite noticeable.
It's just a guess on my part, but with the LED, they're directional. So for example, if you're manufacturing a light, instead of having all the lights come straight down, you might have some lights that are in the LED bank that are out this way and out that way to provide a wider scope. They actually have 4 different classifications of lights, so that when you're talking about how you want the light to be distributed, classification 4 is going to be different than classification 1. So everything depends on what that municipality ordered from its supplier.
Does the town monitor it in any way? I mean, are they using the proper caps and all that?
It depends on whether the town owns their own streetlights, which is really the way to go, or whether you have situations where the utility company owns and maintains the streetlights. You pay a lot more money for that. And I would say most municipalities, not all, but most, are in a situation now where they own the streetlights, and for responsibilities as far as maintenance goes, they hire a company, and Connecticut Conference of Municipalities has recommended companies to do that maintenance. But it's just like, the town does not hire its own employees to go out and pick up the trash. They hire a trash company to do that. Same thing with lighting. Instead of having to deal with all the problems of lights, they simply have a contractor who's responsible for all the corrections, and this light burned out, replace it, that type of thing. Say again?
You mentioned that we're going to revisit our regulations. Can you talk about revisiting our regulations locally?
You could let them know. I don't know anything about that.
We are, the town is going to revisit its regulations in the next coming months and revise them. That'll be kind of the next thing we do with this coalition we formed.
Anyone else have any questions? I wanted to ask just one quick one, since I'm newer to Connecticut. Is there any town who you think is ahead of the game, like doing really well on revising regulations as a municipality, not necessarily as part of a statewide effort?
I'm not familiar with one particular town that really stands out, but it's that state building code that provides shielding requirements for all commercial applications. And here's the trick. In a lot of towns, they'll say, well, you're grandfathered in if when we made the law, you already had the light, okay? they're grandfathered and protected. That sounds fine. But in 2004, the state building code went into effect at a time before LED lights were really on the market. And so anybody that turned around and changed the whole fixture, not just a bulb, but the whole fixture to an LED fixture, had to do it according to the state building code. And if they didn't, they're not grandfathered in. So you can actually use the state building code to get around what you would have to get around if you were in a situation where the local business says, oh, I put that light in, before your local regulation went into effect. This is a state building code issue. So you can have a much further reach in terms of applying that state building code to miscreants. Okay.
There's probably time for questions at the end too, but we'll move on. Yeah, thank you so much, Leo. Next, we're going to talk to Dr. Mario Motta, and he is coming to us live from Zoom. So I think we're going to share his slides.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Do you want me to share the screen now? Shall I share the screen now?
Yes, please. Thank you.
I don't hear anyone, so I'll go ahead and try. Okay. Can you hear me before I start?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
We
I-
hear
I
you
don't
really,
hear-
we hear you very fine, and we
Fine.
see your screen.
Thank you. All right, so I'll proceed. If there's any problems, let me know. I'm a cardiologist, and I've been professor of medicine at Tufts, and I retired last year from full-time cardiology. In my years, I was on the American Medical Association's Council on Science and Public Health, where we developed policy for LEDs when they came out and how it affects human health. And I've been an AMA trustee for 4 years and past member of the board of IDA. So that's my background. And I'll give you a reason why the medical associations feel that lighting should be controlled. Massachusetts Medical Society is also on board. In fact, their recommendations are even stricter than the AMA. His primary reason why I got involved in light pollution many, many years ago, around in the 80s, but around 1990, a gentleman from Connecticut, Dr. Richard Stevens, started publishing data about how, he was an epidemiologist at University of Connecticut, by the way, how light pollution could possibly affect human health and specifically breast cancer. He was poo-pooed at the time, but subsequent to that, many research papers, there's well over, they're in the thousands now, have verified his initial speculation. He unfortunately died 2 years ago, but I got to know him quite well, read his papers, and we collaborated quite a bit. In fact, he was one of the principal writers for the AMA reports. That, by the way, is the back of my house, which is why I'm interested in light pollution initially. So light pollution does affect human health. That would hopefully be of importance to everyone on the planet. It interferes with circadian rhythm. That's been known for quite a long time. And it interferes by suppressing melatonin. What you need to know is melatonin, it rises at night when you're asleep in the dark and is an adjuvant to the immune system. The fact that it's an adjuvant means that it helps the immune system do what it's supposed to do. We have a lot of repair function while we sleep at night. So it's not that light specifically causes cancer. That's not what's happening. But by light suppressing melatonin, it inhibits the release of melatonin, and then you have the greater chance that something will go wrong. Everyone in your room right now produces 8 to 10 cancer cells every day, every single day. But we have an immune system that recognizes them and kills them off. So if you suppress the immune system by suppressing melatonin, it's no stretch of the imagination to understand that over time, a few of these cancer cells will escape if the immune system is not working at good efficiency. And that's the mechanism of how light systems can cause carcinomas. So specifically, suppression of melatonin causes endocrine-related carcinomas, and that involves breast cancer, prostate cancer, thyroid, and a number of others. It causes sleep disturbances. That should be self-obvious. It's suspected in childhood leukemia. The association there is still being worked on. And glare creates dangerous conditions for drivers and pedestrians, as Leo has already pointed out. And of course, the natural environment. 60% of animals on Earth require dark at night. So if you light up the sky across the country, you're adversely affecting the environment. So this is the hormone that we're talking about. It's a hormone that's very primitive in evolution. Even amoeba make melatonin, believe it or not. It's in plankton. It's in just about every animal on Earth, including insects, reptiles, and mammals. So around 1990, Richard Stevens suggested that breast cancer can be caused by suppressing melatonin, and many studies have shown that. Now we know that breast cancer has been proven in rats to increase. Breast cancer cells can be grown and cultured and grow faster in light. It increases prostate cancer, and blue light is especially deleterious. So here is the issue. When you're awake, we can see, of course, and we all know about we have 3 color receptors, red, blue, and green, and we have a nighttime black and white receptor. That's a 4th receptor. But around 2003, it was discovered an RGC receptor located in the retina that has nothing to do with vision. This is a 5th receptor that was unknown more than 20 years ago. And it turns out it has nothing to do with vision. It goes to the pineal gland over here. I hope you can see my arrow pointing. And the pineal gland is what makes melatonin. In addition, this light stimulation on the RGC stimulates the limbic system, which is the more primitive part of the brain, which sole purpose when it is stimulated is to wake us up and make us alert and make us get going. So if you think the way humans evolved over millennia, it was you see blue light, which is the horizon and the sky, meaning the sun's rising, and it's time to wake up and get going. And that's what this receptor does. You didn't see with it, but it peaks in the blue. Unfortunately, that is exactly where these blue LEDs emit light. A gentleman by the name of Luca Schungren in the Netherlands has done quite a number of studies and has shown that we have variable sensitivity in the human population. We have a low sensitivity group and a high sensitivity group. And of course, most are in the middle, but that's like any other biological system. So here's the culprit. There is no such thing as a white LED. I know Leo showed you a white LED a moment ago, but it gets white by taking a blue LED and coating it with phosphors. The blue is supposed to hit the phosphor and gets re-emitted at a lower wavelength. But the problem is there is no way to prevent blue from leaking through. So when LEDs first came out, most of them were in the 4,000 to 6,000 range, intensely white. Some car headlights are in the 6,000 K range. These are the ones that make you blink and cause accidents because you can't see as this car is coming toward you. The AMA has stated we should not use these. We should use below 3,000 K, and that was in 2016. Nowadays, we're recommended 27,000 or below. And the only reason the AMA report said 3,000 is because that was the best that was available in 2016. Now we have LEDs that are made 2,400 to 2,700, and those are far superior. The Massachusetts Medical Society just this past year voted to approve recommendations that all outdoor lighting should be 2,700 or below. As you can see, here's a distribution of what the emission of these LED lights are like. So at 5,000 K, you got this intense blue spike, okay? And not so much of the useful light, which is what we want here. 2,700, you only have about 15% blue emitted, and much more useful light because more of that blue is captured and re-emitted where you want it to be in the lower wavelength, the longer wavelengths. So in my town in Gloucester, Massachusetts, we 10 years ago got rid of the high pressure sodium. Now 60 watt high pressure sodium is the equivalent of 15 watt LED. They didn't make any 15 watt LED back then, but I convinced them to use at least the lowest possible. So in Gloucester, we have 19 watt LED on side streets and up to 40 watt LEDs on main thoroughfares. It's a huge improvement. Here's a mistake many municipalities make. They take a 60 watt LED and not knowing better, they get 50 or 60 watt LEDs. Now you have 4 times as much light is what you really wanted, and you produce intense glare. You got to be very careful about this 4-to-1 conversion factor. And many towns are putting monstrosities like this, not knowing any better. Let's talk about the human eye for a moment. When you're looking at a light, the pupil constricts. When you're looking at a bright light, it can constrict like sunlight and daylight, constrict down to 1 millimeter. Because the pupil, the iris is designed to protect the eye. If otherwise, you would just be blinded all the time. So in dim lights, you fully dilated to 7 millimeters and everything in between. The problem with over bright street lights is it causes the pupil to constrict. So everything around except that light looks very dark. And then people say, well, it's dark all around me, so I need to add more lights. No, you got to control the lighting you got so you don't have that glare sensation. And here's another problem with the human eye. There is a design flaw in it from evolution. As we grow older, first of all, the lens has no blood system. Otherwise, it would interfere with the vision. So it gets its nutrients, that's sugar and oxygen, through the liquid that's in the eye. It just diffuses into the lens. The problem is the human eye grows a layer of cells around it every year, kind of like a tree. And the center eventually gets so far away from the nutrients that cells start to die because they don't get enough nutrients coming in. This happens in your 40s. And this is why in your 40s, the lens becomes stiff, so you start needing reading glasses. It doesn't accommodate these muscles above and below, can't pull on it and allow you to accommodate and see up close. And more distressingly, the center, once the cells start to die, calcify, and these microcalcifications cause scatter. Eventually, there's so much calcification, it turns into a cataract, and then you need to have it removed. So that happens to everyone. It's just part of the aging process. So if you look over here, when you're young, it takes 2,000 Lamberts foot lamberts to cause disability glare. By the time you're 60, it only takes about 400. So the older you are, the less light it takes shining in your eye to cause glare. So I've given many talks, and invariably, I don't know how many people in the audience are in the 60+ range, but they have trouble driving at night. Many people give up driving, and they say, "Is something wrong with my eyes?" No, there's something wrong with engineers. This is an engineering problem. We should design lighting so it doesn't intentionally cause blindness and cause you to not be able to drive at night. If lights were properly shielded, you would see that you could see better and you'll be able to drive safer. So it's a safety issue. In the Netherlands, there was another researcher, I should have put his name there, I'm sorry, I'm blocking on his name, but he took human eyes as cadavers and studied the scatter in the human eye. And not surprised, now this is a log scale, so the difference here is much greater than it seems. Red light, not surprisingly, scatters the least. Blue light scatters the most. So anything that has a lot of blue light is going to cause much more scatter. Same thing that happens with the sun as it sets. You see it turn red because the blue is all scattered out. So here's a couple of slides from friends of mine in Quebec. Taking a picture, and it's at an intersection, and they have an unshielded glare light right there. Look right there. There's a person there that steps forward just a couple of feet. So if you're driving along at 40 or 50 miles an hour, you're not going to see that person because of the glare. If it was shielded, your eye would be more adapted and be able to see down the road. So that leads to unnecessary accidents, parked cars, people, animals, moose hits, deer hits, all because we have unshielded lights. That makes an unsafe situation. Queens, New York, 10 years ago, started putting up 4,000 K lights. They're intensely blue. People hated them. So if you lived in an apartment there and it shined up, this is what your bedroom would look like. And there were numerous complaints to City Hall. Finally, they decided to go with 3,000 K and have them shielded. Now, New York City is one of the most intensely light polluted areas of the world. So if 4,000 K lights bothers you in New York City, think what it can do in a rural or suburban area where it stands out even more. Lee already showed, well, many lighting engineers will talk about how you need to be able to see color at night, which is actually false. You don't really need color, you need acuity to be able to see things. But as you can see, 5,000, 3,000, 2,500 barely affects the color discrimination. So that's actually a false flag. It starts to diminish color only when you get below 1,800, but it really doesn't matter. Many cities now require 3,000 K or lower. When the AMA came out with its policy, in fact, Toronto shortly after demanded AMA compliant lighting, much to the consternation of the lighting industry. Many states have, and I see Connecticut is one of the early adopters of the state law, thanks to Leo and other activists in your state. Congratulations. Massachusetts, I'm embarrassed to say, does not have a statewide law yet, but we're working on it. But we have many cities and towns in Massachusetts that have adopted laws to control excessive lighting. This is 3,000 K lighting. The grass is green. The cement is brown. The sky, the trees are green as well if they were closer. And these are shielded lights. That's what it should look like at night. Some lighting engineers will say, well, you need the bright lights to discern down the road. Alan Lewis and Ron Gibbons are past presidents of the International Illuminating Society, which Leo is a member of. And they showed in 2 separate studies that the difference between 6,000 K and 2,000 K is essentially negligible. The differences here are only when you get way out to the side, but you're supposed to be looking down the road. Multiple cities have shown that people want warmer lights. Once people don't complain about it when they're putting up because they don't realize how bad it's going to be, but once they're up, they revolt. Davis, California, actually the city voted to raise its own taxes as the citizens to replace the LED lights because so many people hated them. Seattle just 3 years ago voted the same way. They're going to replace all of their 4,000K lights that they put up 14 years ago, and they're in the process of doing that. Pittsburgh just recently voted the same way. So what I tell many city councils is don't make that mistake. You think you're saving money by getting 4,000K lights from bad information. They actually cost the same, but it's going to cost you double when you have to replace them because literally people hate them once they go up. So let's talk about specifically human health effects. The theory, as first proposed by Richard Stevens, was shift workers will be high risk. Makes sense. You're affecting your melatonin. Blind women will be at lower risk. And by the way, shift workers do have a high risk, by the way. Multiple studies have shown. Blind women, interestingly, someone actually went out and did a study and found 343 twins around the world, one of which was blind. It's amazing that you can find that many. But it turned out of those 343, the twin that was blind had a 25% lower risk of breast cancer than the twin that could see. Lighted bedrooms increase risk. Long sleep lowers risk. So for that, the AMA stepped up to the plate. I had a hand in this. In 2009, we passed the resolution saying that all lighting in streets should be shielded. That really is a no-brainer, and that didn't cause any ripples. 2012, because of the proliferation of lights and where LEDs were first starting to come out, we passed a 60-page report that had 136 peer-reviewed papers. In order to get anything through the AMA, you have to basically have essentially every word peer-reviewed and proven in a paper. So there was an effort, but we got it through. I was helped by these gentlemen here to produce this paper, and it was passed unanimously by the AMA. It remains policy that we should take account of human health effects when we put up lighting. Lighting industry really didn't pay attention. So in 2016, we put out a 32-page paper with about, get how many references, but there was something like 40-something references that basically stated because the entire country was going to now change to LEDs, that they should use 3,000K or lower lighting for outdoor installations. And the reason why 3,000K was chosen specifically because that was the lowest available at the time. And it specifically says or lower, which the lighting industry in many towns conveniently forget that that's in the recommendation, because now we can do better. And we should go lower, as low as possible, rather than causing harm. 3,000K gives you 21% blue. 2,500 gives you 15% blue. So the lower, the better. And that remains AMA policy. Lest you think it's just a group of doctors who feel that way. In 2017, the Nobel Prize in Medicine went to Hall, Brosbach, and Young, specifically for the discovery of the mechanisms that control circadian rhythm. And here is a graph that they produced. Yeah, I'm not going to go through that, but I just want you to know that it's well studied, and the Nobel Committee and international scientists felt that it was important enough that they be given the Nobel Prize, which I heartily agree. That Nobel Prize helped quiet some of the anger at the AMA by the lighting industry when that paper first came out, I actually got hate mail from certain lighting engineers saying, your doctor should just stay in your lane and stop telling us what to do. And then the Nobel comes out and basically says we're right. I knew we were right because all the data shows that. I was also on an international committee called Dark and Quiet Skies for Science. And this is an international community under the auspices of the UN. I was appointed to it to represent the AMA, basically for 5 issues. The professional astronomers want to protect astronomical observatories and satellite constellations and radio astronomy. And then there's protection of dark sky oases or dark sky sites that the Dark Sky Association promotes. But I was involved with the light pollution impact on the bioenvironment. So quite a bit of sleep research has gone to show that if you sleep longer, you're less likely to develop certain diseases such as cancers because you have a longer time to repair. Circadian clock is basically this melatonin-induced and pineal gland-induced changes in our biorhythm. And it turns out that 1 out of basically 10% of all our genes are clock controlled. So is it any great surprise that if we mess up that system, we're going to have problems if you're basically interfering with 10% of the activation of your genes? So circadian disruption causes effect on sleep. If you don't sleep very well, you don't think as well the next day. Cancer, breast and prostate. Those are well established now, many papers. I'll give you a couple in a moment. It increases obesity by altering leptin, diabetes by causing obesity, mood disorders, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar are all increased if you suppress sleep patterns. So breast cancer and light at night. Light at night alters hormones, increasing risk. And that explains the high risk in industrial societies. Shift work, as I already said, or well, I already showed that. So let me move on, actually. Here's one of my favorite studies. It was done by Dr. Blask, who's at Tulane. And this was around
Dr.
2000. Yes?
I think that we started a little late, so we're a little short on time. So I don't know if you can wrap up in a couple of minutes. I'm so sorry.
Okay, I only have a few more slides, so I'll go really quick then. So he implanted human breast cancer under the skin of nude mice and then subjected them day-night cycle. This is the rate of growth. Groups of rats, increasing amount of light until the ones that were subjected to light at night continuously had this much rate of growth of breast cancer compared to this. That's a pretty dramatic study. The Harvard study came out studying 110,000 women and showed a 14% increase in breast cancer if you're exposed to light on the outside. This is outdoor light shining in your bedroom. So people who lived in cities compared to rural areas, and a stepwise increase depending on which quintile you were exposed to throughout the country. Unless you think that's an outlier, there are 20 studies now from all across the world that show the exact same thing, that if you're exposed to light at night shining in your bedroom, you have an increased rate of breast cancer from about 14 to 17%. It affects plants and animals as well. We already mentioned that. Affects turtles, birds, fishes. I'm just going to skip over a lot of this because time is short, but even salmon runs have been affected. So let me see. And here's just let me mention this. Everyone's heard about the algae bloom in Florida. Well, it turns out algae, a lot of it's from runoff from the rivers from farms in Florida, but the algae would normally be eaten at night by zooplankton that rise at night and eat. The problem is that if you're anywhere near the coast, all of Florida's coast is lit up. Phytoplankton will not go to the light. Consequently, the algae doesn't get eaten, and that contributes to the red tide bloom. So I'll stop there. I have a website if you want to learn more, and happy to answer any questions.
I think because we are short in time, maybe we'll just take 1 or 2 questions. There's one in the chat.
Okay, let me stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat again.
Okay, so
Hold
the
on.
question in the chat is, oh,
I see it
okay,
now.
gotcha.
Okay, is the AARP involved in pushing the automobile to reduce the lights? Well, that's a problem. The street lights are controlled by city, state, and the Department of Energy nationally. Car lights, unfortunately, are basically self-governed by a ridiculous law passed by Congress about 25 years ago. And consequently, they self-regulate. And that's how they get away with using these absurd lights. Multiple attempts have been raised to change that, but they're free to do whatever they want and drive us crazy.
I think we all want to just sit here in the dark for the rest of the night. Does anyone in the room have a question? Yeah. Okay, so the question in the room is whether people living in high latitudes, or if their circadian rhythms are different. Like Alaska, you're thinking with like a very long daylight time or short nighttime?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I showed you 20 studies that show that light at night causes increased cancers in many studies around the world. There was one negative study. It's in my slide, but I didn't have time to go over it. And that was from Montreal. And the reason it was negative when they went back and looked is because people in Montreal and their high latitude, use blockout shades, because in the summer you'd never get any sleep because the sun never sets. It's always light. In Alaska, the same thing. People there in the summertime basically block out with blockout shades and prevent that from happening. So the further north you are, the more likely, like in the Scandinavian countries, of using blockout shades.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Motta. If you want to stick around, we might have time for questions at the very end, but Meredith, are you ready? And Meredith, but thank you so much.
Okay.
Yes, I have such a happy announcement for everybody. Guess what? HB 6607 was passed unanimously out of the Senate just about 40 minutes ago, an hour ago. We couldn't be happier. I know a lot of people, so many people were part of making that happen, and we were relentless in advocating. And I just want to also acknowledge my co-chair, Craig Ripass. He's here tonight, and we've just been organizing. So thanks to everyone who wrote to their representatives and senators and made this bill. Well, we think it's going to become a law. So thank you. And so this law, HB 6607, is a law that would require all state-owned buildings in Connecticut to dim their lights after 11 p.m. year-round. It started off, they still call it an act for the birds. It started off just seasonally, like the way that you do with Lights Out, to require the lights to be dimmed during peak migration time, which is each spring and fall. But this law got changed when it passed out of the House unanimously to become year-round, which is great, for all the reasons that we've been hearing tonight, is that it's better to be around all night. Not just, it's still called for the birds, but the birds' ecosystems, to stay intact, they need to have the normal natural cycles of dark and light. So we couldn't be happier about this. Yeah, it's really great, because we're only the 4th or 5th state in the country to have a law in place like this one that will require all unnecessary, non-essential lighting. That means decorative lighting to be dimmed after 11 p.m. The law still needs to be signed by Governor Lamont. So we're going to, but it would take, does it start in January 1st of 2023, 2024? I think it starts the beginning of next year. I don't know, but we will make an announcement once. Yeah, we're lucky to be in a state that recognizes the problem of light pollution and its impacts on the bioenvironment, as we heard earlier. So I'm going to be talking more about the impacts specifically on birds for lighting. Sorry, this microphone's a little jangly, but hopefully you can hear me. Yeah, maybe I'll just hold it, in fact. That's great. Thanks for that suggestion. So we saw some images earlier of birds that have been impacted by light pollution. If we go to that first slide, the first slide here, we can see it's hard for us to imagine that these songbirds, these passerines, that they actually navigate at nighttime, but they do. They're actually traveling very high in the stratosphere, 2,000, 5,000 miles up, feet up, sorry, and they're traveling from their wintering grounds in South America or in Central America, and they're traveling up to Connecticut in the springtime, and then they return to their wintering grounds in the southern hemisphere in the fall. And so they travel actually at nighttime. And it's hard for us to imagine these little small, beautiful birds, we see images of them around, that they travel oftentimes in mixed flocks, but they're flying across ocean, across landmass, and they're in the percentage of them is quite high. So of birds that migrate is about 60 to 70% of birds in North America migrate, and then of those 60% migrate at nighttime. And there's reasons why they would want to migrate at night. First of all, lower temperatures. Second of all, fewer predators, because actually the hawks and those kinds of birds that would prey on passerines, they actually travel during the daytime on the flows of the air. And so the songbirds and the different kinds of birds, they travel at nighttime. And what is remarkable, if we could go to the next slide, is there a way to make this larger so that we don't, it doesn't matter if we can't, but so what's incredible is that birds actually use cues in the natural environment to know when to navigate and to know where to navigate. And the studies show that they actually navigate using the moon. They navigate with the setting sun when they rise up to start to fly or to migrate, is as the sun is setting. And they even use the constellations. And they know this because they actually did an experiment where they brought migratory birds into like a hangar and projected the constellation onto the ceiling, and the birds oriented to themselves and flew in the correct direction. And when they rotated that, the birds corrected themselves. So the birds actually were seeing the constellation in the sky and navigating by it. So that means they're very sophisticated. They're using also, they can tell the cardinal directions in their eyes, so they can know where north, south is. So they're using all different kinds of sophisticated things that they've evolved to use. Now, what the problem is that once we introduce artificial light into the environment, is that it blocks out the cues that they would normally use. They won't be able to see the stars. They get confused seeing patterns of light on the ground that seem to them like, what is that? Is that the rising sun? Is that it disorients them and confuses them on their journeys. But we also know from the tribute in light that happens in New York City every, in September, is that two large shafts of light are projected into the sky, and birds are migrating during that time because it's in September. They get caught in the light and they can't break out of it. Luckily, New York City Audubon has an agreement that they will dim the lights so that the birds can continue on their journeys. But the problem is that shows to what extent birds are attracted to light and disoriented by light and caught in the light. So light, artificial light is recognized as a major anthropogenic threat to birds. And it's something that we can do a lot to address. And so I just want to take a look at this next slide. The problem is that bird populations are in steep decline right now. We've lost 3 billion birds in North America since the 1970s. There was a really heartbreaking report that came out in 2019 in the Science Journal that showed that we've lost 1 in 4 birds from the landscape since the 1970s. And that's not just rare birds, it's also common birds like the black-capped chickadee. And there's a lot of reasons for this. And there was a really important report that just came out last week that showed that these threats that the birds face in the natural environment, which include light pollution, things like pesticides that poison their food sources, loss of habitat, and then also window collisions, because birds don't recognize glass. We don't either. We've just kind of learned to know where it could be, but they can't see glass, and so oftentimes birds will, if they get too close to a building, could crash into windows. These threats, this report that just came out last week said, are cumulative, they interact together, and that they cause burdens, so that if a bird is affected by light pollution, more likely to be hit by a collision. Light pollution causes more likelihood for collisions, and then once they get hit in a collision, then they're more susceptible to other types of threats. So the problem is that we have this major problem of bird declines. Can I have the next slide, please? This is Edward P. Evans Hall. I just graduated, 2 weeks ago from Yale. And this is a really famous building on our campus, which is designed by Foster and Partners. They're a very famous architecture firm. The man was knighted, Norman Foster, for designing this building. The problem is it's made almost entirely of glass with an interior courtyard, which you couldn't even imagine if you had some vicious mind and wanted to make something that would kill birds. This would be the building that you'd make, all glass with a courtyard with fruit trees around it and trees inside. The birds don't know how to navigate around it or what it is, and they crash into it. And unfortunately, just a couple years ago, a Bicknell's thrush, which is an endangered bird, was found there. First time this bird has been seen in New Haven since 1975. Now, the first time they saw that bird was dead because it had crashed into Edward P. Evans Hall. The next slide. So these are some of the pictures of birds. These are some of the pretty birds that we're seeing on our chairs here. Northern Parula and hummingbird. And so each fall and spring would be spikes in these migratory birds because the birds don't know this environment. They're here just briefly, trying to lay over, trying to forage, trying to continue their journey. They briefly stop here, and then their entire journeys are cut short and their lives are cut short. Can I have the next slide, please? This is some of the birds that are tagged. The woman who started this monitoring project, Vivica Morris, she forged a partnership with the Peabody Museum, which is across the street, and so they bring the bird carcasses to the Peabody Museums to be studied. A lot of them, unfortunately, are juveniles. In the fall, you see a major spike in the number of bird collisions, and it's oftentimes juveniles who are not used to this environment. They're more susceptible to light pollution, more susceptible to collisions. The next slide, please. So that's the spike in the fall. And then the next slide, please. And then this is a really interesting study that came out in McCormick Place in Chicago. They turned off half of their lights at this glassy building, and they were able to, just by turning off their lights, reduce the number of collisions by 60%. And that shows not just that, that the lights were contributing to the collisions, but it also shows that one building can make a difference, which means that all of us can make a difference with our homes and our businesses. If we dim the lights, we won't attract migratory birds near to these areas where they are more susceptible to collisions. So this is a very important study and showed the links that was already evident since the early 1990s that light pollution was contributing to bird collisions, and that bird collisions are a major source of bird mortality. Does anybody here know how many birds die in North America every year due to window collisions? That's right, it's nearly 1 billion, and that's probably an underestimate. We don't know, but that's a number that came out in a study from 2014. So given the number of buildings that have gone up since then, this could be an underestimate. So the next slide, please. What can you do? And this is exactly what the bill that just passed out of the Senate asks people to do, is turn off the lights from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. This is when the migratory birds flying over, and those are the dates of the spring and fall migration. Starts April 1st to May 31st. They're in a hurry to get here. They take 2 months to transit through. And then when they return in the fall, they're a little bit slower. They're not as much of a hurry to get to their nesting grounds. So it takes 3 months, goes from August 15th to November 15th. And so that's a time when you just want to make extra sure to turn off any unnecessary lights. That's decorative lights, any indoor lights that you don't need, to use spot lighting, and just to double check to reassess your lighting needs for those times. And then the next slide, please. So reevaluate lighting needs, turn off your decorative lights, turn off your floodlights, install automatic motion detectors. So that's really something, that was something that Leo talked about. Use the light when you need it, when you don't, and that's a really good security assistant as well, because it will alert you if somebody's in the area or something's in the area. And then to substitute task lighting. So if you're up late, don't leave on the kitchen light and the living room light and your bedroom light. Just use the light in the area where you need it if you're up past 11 o'clock. And then I think that's it. I also very warmly invite you to join Lights Out Connecticut. You can go to our website, which is lightsoutsct.org, and you can pledge to turn off your lights. And you can also get more resources there. So we highly recommend that you join Lights Out Connecticut, and you can get some stickers and other things and sign the pledge in the back. Any questions? I know we're a little late. It's almost 9, so maybe I'll take one quick one if anyone has a burning question. But then please come to our website and learn more. I realize it's getting a little late, but
Don't forget to pick up the literature in the back.
yes, there's all sorts of great literature in the back from Lights Out, so I'm part of Lights Out Connecticut, and I warmly, again, invite you to join us.
And you'll also find some sample bulbs that you can use. I brought one that actually has the motion sensor in the bulb for outside our garage. And we want a light there, but we only need it when we drive up or when we're trying to come in. So it's all about reducing or eliminating. We can all do that. So I hope you feel empowered to make a difference tonight. Thank you for coming.